Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we'll be talking about a very important topic and subject, and that is about the social media issues. Obviously, wherever you go, you will see that this is a new phenomenon. Not a new, I mean, it's been over 2.5 decades now. Internet has become so common. Look at the number of people who are using it. Forget about the youth. People from all ages. They are, in fact, glued rather to whether you talk about Facebook, you talk about Twitter, you talk about Instagram, you talk about other certain groups of that sort, which we consider part of the social media. Now, that is something very important. But having said that, what sort of a check do we have regarding that? Because a lot of people can post anything and everything on the social media, can malign anyone they want to, and nothing has been done so far. So primarily, the government took a very interesting decision last year in October, and they revised social media rules and they were prepared by the committee constituted by the Prime Minister and the Chairman, PTA. And after the due consultation process with various relevant national and international stakeholders, and stood approved, as I mentioned, on 6th of October 2020, almost 4 months ago. Social media platforms are being exploited by various quarters in Pakistan to spread fake and false narratives, triggering chaos in society and adversely impacting our social, cultural, and religious norms. We'll also be talking about Pakistan is facing an unprecedented onslaught of hybrid warfare, which we call the fifth generation war, due to regional and extra-regional realignments. It is therefore imperative for Pakistani state to defend itself against a speeding invasion of chaotic cyberspace. Some rights groups have opposed these new online content rules and termed them as a measure to limit freedom of speech and increase internet surveillance. Now, interestingly, when you talk about the check and balance, there isn't any. You talk about the power of social media, forget about what's going on at the moment, or forget about the fifth generation warfare or the hybrid warfare for that matter. Just think about what happened exactly 10 years ago in the Northern African part. It was social media that was the catalyst in changing or toppling certain governments over there. So this is something very important, very powerful, and now if there is a story, before even it appears on the mainstream media, it's on the social media. And there are more views on social media, interestingly. So you can well imagine the kind of viewership it has. To talk about this, the new regulations and what sort of measures do we need to undertake to put a check, not a check of that sort where the freedom of speech is curtailed. What I'm saying is, at least there should be some sort of an equilibrium. What can be posted, what cannot be. I'll just give you one example. Well, before I may put that to the public, I'll put that question instead to our panelists. And let me introduce you to our guests in the studio. We have with us Ali Sultan Saab. He's an international law expert. Thank you so much, Ali Sultan, for your time. And we have with us Dr. Talat Shabir Saab. He is also a senior analyst. Thank you so much, Dr. Saab, for your presence as well. Now, Ali Sultan Saab, one question which is rather a very common observation, I would say. Whenever we talk about social media, it seems as if, this is something related to the youth. Because I still remember people used to make fun that, oh, General Musharraf is going to sweep the elections. And then we got to know that, no, this is not the case. This is a certain group of people who are just, talking about it on social media. But later on, once you get to know about what happened during the Arab Spring, that tells us a very different story that actually tells us about the magnitude and the power of social media. Anything and everything, before it's reported on the mainstream, it is on the social media. You talk about decision-making process, you talk about the kind of perceptions that are developed. I mean, this is a tool, I would say, and unfortunately, most of the CEOs and the owners are Indians. Whenever we try to put up a program on YouTube, sir, and if the heading is regarding Kashmir, either it is not posted, or they do not let us post it, or even if it is posted, it is removed at some stage. Let's start off from there, sir.
Well, I agree that the power of social media is immense, and it's something which has grown exponentially since even the time of President Musharraf, as you mentioned. So today it has become almost a behemoth, something which is pretty much out of control. and it's incredibly important to bring in the right kind of regulations. I'm not saying that regulations should be draconian or anything like that, but we need the right kind of regulations to find that equilibrium where freedom of expression is also protected, but at the same time, critical national security interests and other forms of speech which is being propagated through these social media networks, sometimes very overtly inciting violence. There are groups which are breeding grounds for extremism, for terrorism, and so on and so forth. Just a few years ago, if you remember, the Christchurch bombing incident, it was actually streamed live on Facebook. So
he was shooting it while he was shooting
and streaming it live on Facebook. So the point is that yes, it has fundamentally changed the way we consume news and the way we form perceptions. Now that's also very important because the way social media is set up in terms of its algorithms, the aim really is to get as many hits as possible. So being sensationalist helps. So it privileges certain kinds of behaviors. It privileges certain kinds of viewpoints. And that's very dangerous because that can distort reality. So one consequence of social media, one negative consequence of social media has been that there has been this decay of truth in the world. And there's, of course, this rising tendency towards authoritarianism. We've seen it in India, for example, how the BJP government, how Narendra Modi has used social media to his advantage to change perceptions of the electorate over there. So the point is that these are real problems, and we need to find the right set of regulations in order to curb this.
All right. Now, Dr. Saab, in fact, when you look at the issues in United States of America, for that matter, during the last election and even post-election, the kind of attitude the former President Donald Trump had, and the way he was tweeting, the way he was, sending messages, they were pretty inciting also as far as violence is concerned. But at the same time, we also saw that his account was blocked. We never heard that the President of America is the most powerful man, his account could be blocked. But yes, sir, there was a proper rule, there was a system, and they applied that approach, and finally this is what we have seen. But in Pakistan, sir, maybe this phenomenon is new, perhaps, or rather, people are not much aware of it. We do not know what our rights are, we do not know where the rights end. So primarily what we witnessed that you can malign anyone and everyone. This is at the basic level. But when you talk about, for example, recently there was this huge story of EUD Disinfo Lab. Imagine their presence was in 170 plus countries, and they were targeting Pakistan from left, right, and center. And we haven't heard much, despite the fact that they were, I think they were called and they must have been told that what is going on. But still, they were operational for over 15 years. So where is the international level checks, or what sort of, preparation do you think Pakistan need to do?
Thank you very much. I think when we talk of social media from international politics perspective, so we find some kind of malfunctioning going on by countries like you referred to Disinfo Lab. They were working for the last 15 years, and they were keeping presence in so many countries, and they were trying to malign, they were kind of building narrative against Pakistan.
Correct.
Are trying to build a negative image of Pakistan. So, and similarly, if you talked about President Trump when he tweeted, and when they realized that he is inciting violence, so they blocked him. So that means that that's specific to a country. Whereas when you talk of international relations, and when we talked of Disinfo Lab, and we've taken this case to various countries, various agencies, so though there's a response to it, and some of the Western countries also criticized India for that. But I think the response is not as it should have been. So there has to be a kind of regulation when we talk it internationally. For instance, we must take this in Disinfo Lab case as an example to the world, and convince, because we are, you talked of hybrid warfare, we are one of the major countries which is victim of hybrid warfare.
That's correct.
And it is going to continue, because the issues of conflict is continuing, and likewise I think this warfare will also continue, and social media will play a great role in this, and most probably to the advantage of Indians. As you said, most of the social media organizations are led by Indians, so they won't let your narrative pass through. So they will definitely support Indian narrative against Pakistan. Now, when we talk of at domestic level, you know, there are two. I view this issue from 2 points of views. One is that point of hybrid warfare from security perspective, and the other is from social fiber perspective. You see, there is no check on social media at all. You know, you can defame anybody, you can abuse anybody, you can do whatever you feel like doing on social media. There is no regulation.
There's no regulation.
Alisa has
right?
talked about. And one thing is very important, that you know, now the electronic media and print media has now started taking cues from social media. You see so many media persons,
correct,
important media persons have gone on to social media networks, and they have now a bigger social media you know, operating instead of mainstream electronic and print media. This is very, very strange. So, and the important thing is, nobody wants to be regulated. And I think the very purpose of social media, the way it is being used, will die if we regulate it. You see, there's a thin line difference between when we say it's you know, freedom of speech issue or freedom of expression issue. It's not. I think in all the countries, like you mentioned about Trump, when he crossed limits, they stopped him. So there has to be limit decided by the state. State has to see as to what is in the interest of state, and how can we, there has to be some kind of regulation in place whereby you control all the networks that are working, you know, there's a fake story, talking from hybrid point of view, there's a fake story, and people supporting that story, it is spreading all across your country. Rumors
are spread like this. Yeah.
And you know, some people tell me, okay, you see, this is a fake, just even if you delete it, so there is some impression of the story or the
that is
image
left behind, yeah.
that stays for good. So I think there has to be, I'm for strongly for a regulation that actually regulates this media, this space, this information space, and there has to be, information landscape has to be controlled and regulated.
Now, Ali Salman Sahab, another important point, Ali Sultan Sahab, when you talk about, let's suppose, I mean, there is a personal private level of use and there is an international level of use, but social media has become a very, very strong tool now. Now, sir, when you talk about putting a check on them, or for example, regulating them, there is going to be a lot of hue and cry for sure, because this platform is somewhat pretty open. But sir, just like the way a lot of television channels are regulated by, other than PTV obviously, are regulated by the authority, we have got so many other organizations of a similar sort. They are the regulators primarily. Whether you talk about television or you talk about petroleum issue, I mean, there are proper bodies and they have a certain task assigned to look after the matters. Over here, sir, is it PTA that is looking into the issue? Because there is such a confusion. If there is a proper complaint, if there is some sort of an issue, where do you go? Somebody would say go to PTA, somebody is going to say call the Ministry of Information Technology, somebody else is going to guide you, go to FIA. Such a huge confusion, and you keep on moving around till you end up losing those 6 months in which you can register a case.
Yeah. Well,
so unfortunate.
That's true. Well, just to answer your question, and then I'll like to add a few more comments. Now, under these rules, the removal and blocking of unlawful online content, which were enacted in October 2020.
Correct.
Under those rules, it's very clear that the authority that would really be in charge of monitoring the the internet and social media space would be the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, PTA.
PTA.
So there is some clarity as far as those rules are concerned. And that's how it is in the UK also. It's the Ofcom, which is their version of PTA, which polices the internet. Now, while it's true that at the international level, as far as international law is concerned, there is no treaty or convention or an international agreement which would be regulating these extremely important issues. But that does not mean that there are no regulations at the state level. So there are several countries, and the list is growing, and it will continue to grow because in the initial years, I think this perspective that a free internet is almost a human right, and that there should be no fetters on it, was the more dominant one. But the world has witnessed some of the dreadful consequences of social media as well in the last few years. Donald Trump, for instance, it was unthinkable that a person like Donald Trump would become the president of the United States
That's
just
correct.
a few years ago. So the social media enabled it. It's no coincidence that we see this rise of authoritarianism in the world. It's directly linked to social media and its power to shape the narrative and so on and so forth. So the point is that the world is now definitely coming alive to this issue, and we witness in the last 2 or 3 years countries such as Russia, Germany, United Kingdom, Australia, at least Australia, UK, you would associate as being jurisdictions which would provide maximum freedom of speech. It's in their ethos, so to speak. But even they have come up with some strict regulations in order to govern some of the negative and dreadful consequences of social media. So that's a trend which I see would continue to grow, and we need to assess these social media rules that have been enacted in Pakistan in October through that prism, and then assess whether they are tailored to serve the purpose that they are intended to achieve, which is to protect our national interest and also to maintain the fabric of our society and also to protect us from fake news and rumors and conspiracies and so on and so forth, and also to minimize or eliminate all impulses that lead towards violence, terrorism, extremism, and so on and so forth.
So these are the major areas of concern primarily.
Yes, and I think that's and these
Because
are
Alisab, if you remember when this ICE was created, initially I remember when we used to cover these stories, we used to call them the freedom fighters or the splinter groups who were supported by the West. Eventually we got to know ISIS, Islamic State, and then we got to know that these people have got such a strong influence on the social media that they are actually recruiting people. People are coming from UK, from Germany, educated people, joining their hands and fighting in Iraq or Syria for that matter. So there was a proper check after that. So do we have a universal standard of checks, or every country can make their own?
every country, of course, is sovereign in the international system.
Like for
And
example, let me give you an example. Like China, for that matter, it has a very proper authoritarian regime. We all know that. Over there, sir, when I visited, interestingly, the Facebook was in Chinese. They have no access with the international Facebook. They have their own.
well, it's called the Great Firewall of China.
The Great Firewall, yeah, exactly.
what they've-
Keeping them away.
Yeah, what they've done is that they've kept all the foreign technology companies away, social media companies away, but they've provided their own local versions of it in China, right? But for that, of course, you require the technical know-how and a very strong technological base which China
Which
has.
they have, yeah.
So not every country can replicate the Chinese model, so to speak. That's how it is in China. But of course, it's the sovereign right of every state to enact laws for its own territory. and exercising this sovereign power. Many states, I just gave you some examples, including Australia, Germany. In Germany, social media companies, platforms can be fined up to 50 billion euros if they do not comply with the directives of their regulators. And the timelines in Germany, which the German regulators provide to the social media companies and the internet service providers, are quite similar to the timelines which have been provided for in these rules, which is that if there is some unlawful content that has been uploaded on social media, then these companies within 24 hours have to remove it. Otherwise, they will incur penalties, fines. So this is something that we see in Germany as well. So as I was saying earlier as well, we would notice this trend rising, not receding. So that's where things are at. And in addition to that, in the initial years, the hope was that perhaps these social media companies would be able to effectively self-regulate themselves, come up with their own policies and guidelines, which would keep things in balance.
Even Aliza,
but that has
this
not happened.
Self-regulation issue was also applied by the mainstream media in Pakistan. The director news and a couple of other senior management officials, even the owners, they would sit down and come up with some sort of a guideline. But that did not work so well, unfortunately. So if you allow me, we've been joined in by Hamid Khan Al-Mashriqi Saab, the senior analyst. Assalamu alaikum ji. Mashriqi Saab, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam ji, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Since we are talking about the revised social media rules that were prepared by the government of Pakistan in October, it got approved last year. And there are so many social media platforms now where stories could be created, certain narratives are built, certain sort of ideologies are imposed, and you can do whatever you want to do. At the end of the day, a person who is holding a smartphone in his hand, I mean, he ends up using it all the time except for the time he's or she is sleeping, right, sir? That is the kind of influence we have now. The gadgets have improved, the technology is improving, internet speed has gone up. Just imagine whatever we can do now, we could never even think of doing it 10, 25 years ago maybe. Your take, sir, where are we heading? What sort of regulations do you think should be in place? What do we need to do?
Thank you very much. Actually, this is the right time to put these kinds of regulations, and it is very important for the security and sovereignty of Pakistan. I'll give you one very good example that we have seen just last month when EU Disinfo Lab, reports and investigation came out, and we just realized that how much propaganda war can influence on a certain narrative. And this is what happened against Pakistan, and this was happening for many years. So, the regulations like that, where we can have a check and balance on what is being, spreaded as a fake news or real news, the difference between the reality and fiction need to be identified. And yes, the people who will misuse it for the I would say terrorism act, for other things, they must bring to the justice, and that's why the regulations like that are very important. And I think that we have seen last year when Facebook owner Mark Zuckerberg was in front of the Congress, and he was answering the questions in relation to the privacy and in relation to the user secrecy. Now Pakistan has all the rights to implement the rules where we can have our security measures must be taken, and this is very important. And as we have seen that Indian and certain anti-Pakistan narrative is always built within the country and out of Pakistan as well. And I think the Pakistan cybersecurity needs to be very strong. And this is a tool to fight against the hybrid war. This is the time of fifth generation war. And this is how we have to take very strict measures, and we have to take very strict step. Otherwise, these negative propaganda and false narrative could damage the country a lot, and it is not bearable for Pakistan. And I would say that this is the right of Pakistan to even to speak to Twitter, Facebook, and all these big social media giants, that this is our boundary lines, and these are the things they have to follow. Like we have seen when Kashmir atrocities in Kashmir was happening,
Exactly, I was
and
about to come to that.
India, yeah, the Modi government influenced Twitter and Facebook, and they didn't let them show the real picture of the what's happening in Kashmir. So this is the misuse of power by India. Then Pakistan is the fourth largest user of social media in the world. So this is the time when Pakistan needs to use its influence all over the big giants of the social media, and Pakistan can counter the Indian narrative, which is based on fake and false propaganda. And this is the time when Pakistan has to come forward. Indian narrative is always against Pakistan with misleading news. Now Pakistan needs to come up, and these rules and regulations will help, because so many innocent people, they just see a news on the social media, and sometimes without even going into investigation, they just prolong it, or they just spread it, and this is how misconcepts creates in the country. And this could we have seen, I'll give you one example, that just few days before when there was a technical blackout in the country, all over the world, all over Pakistan, there was electricity have some problem,
I remember,
and there
yes.
was do you
Many
remember,
rumors.
so many rumors. Exactly, million rumors. And I was laughing. I was, honestly speaking, I was thinking, how could they come with such a stupid ideas? And this is what false propaganda is. This is what false narrative is. And
And
that's the
interestingly,
point
this
when
is what the
Pakistan.
mind accepts also. That is another very
Exactly.
important issue. Now, I'll just get back to you, Mashruqi Sahab. Dr. Sahab, when you talk about the political parties, interestingly, there is a new phenomena. Well, how many people were there? How many chairs were there? Let's count. Okay, the opposition would say, let's suppose 100,000 people were there. The government would end up saying, no, we have our own count, and that was not more than 10,000. And you would end up seeing the pictures picked up from the social media and pasted there. Like this gentleman who passed away, the religious cleric, and there were like literally millions of people at his funeral. And those pictures were picked up and pasted on certain gatherings of the political parties. And interestingly, I mean, people believed that, wow, this was it. And they were even talking about it on the mainstream media. One example. Second, for example, you talked about UK, you talked about Germany, for that matter. So France is another example. This Charlie Hebdo case, for that matter, which resulted in so many killings and hatred, and a lot of tension has risen between Pakistan and France also. Our Prime Minister was very straight that, look, this is not acceptable at all. But when you talk about the freedom of speech out there, a country like France for that matter, so they would come up with caricatures and so many other things, you know, just to create that kind of an impression that, see, maybe it is a joke for them, not for us. We take it very seriously. But sir, we did not hear much about that. What sort of a regulation now needs to be imposed there?
When we talk of regulation,
Because that is in one way or the other, sir, also inciting violence,
yes.
right? But nothing was done,
True.
correct?
Yeah, when I think it's in international domain. I think Elisa would be better to answer. But I think there has to be some kind of regulation for international users also. That if you look, when we talk of India, for in the that information space, India becomes an international state for us. When they affect our information space and they carry out propaganda, they incite, they do they try to create a different situation in Kashmir, like Hamid Sahab said. The self-regulation, in my opinion, is not possible, particularly when the user is using it for negative purpose. When a terrorist is using it, when a person who is inciting violence is using it, self-regulation is a term which I think is not proper for social media when it is being used negatively. Yes, there has to be regulation by government, like the way we have a policy now enacted. now this is the policy, and now the government can drive this policy, and they can just get it implemented. Now, one thing. Second, strangely, I was just going through various content of the policy, and there was mention of establishing an office in Pakistan and having a focal person to connect with PTA. Now, look at this. That actually implies that previously there was no office of the social media organization in Pakistan, or there was no focal person. That means a social media organization was entirely working from abroad, from somewhere. So that's not acceptable. Now that has to be that has to be regulated at our country level, and we have to. I think I maintain that we need to be very, very strict on implementing these laws. We need to be very, very strict on what is our national interest, and issues that impact our, like you mentioned about blasphemy in France. So this is a very serious issue for us. So how can we
Not
stop?
only was for the entire Muslim Ummah.
Muslim world, yeah. But how can you stop this from happening? How can you stop spread of
You
this?
know why I raise this question? Because if some wrongdoing has been done from a certain quarter, and if there is a reaction, and that reaction is shown and projected, and that concept of Islamophobia comes in,
Yes.
and they say, well, the Muslims are too hyper, they do not have any control over their own actions. See, they are ready to kill or die for that matter. So, but hiding the reality, this is what exactly needs to be done. Like, this is how we feel, this is how you feel. So, it could be different.
And there is, there is intentional construct of something also.
Absolutely,
because they deliberately do such thing to ignite, kind of emotions. They provoke Muslim world.
Absolutely.
And then they achieve their aims by doing it. Like Modi, he achieved, I think, objective of creating a situation in Kashmir, blocking their internet, and creating their own kind of fake scenario in Kashmir or elsewhere in India. And this is what the use of, and particularly when the Indian users or Indian nationals across the world have, a kind of control over the social media organizations. This is very, I think this is very alarming, and there should be some international effort done towards having some kind of regulation, so that internationally also the countries are checked somehow to
I think things need to be regulated, not totally in control, but still. Now, sir, I'll just read out something. It's so important. It says the new rules define boundaries to protect masses from various online negativity. Blasphemy says discrediting state, abusing institutions, appointments, individuals, inciting sectarian or ethnic hate and harassment. It says the current government has shown a will to enact laws. Now, will is there. Do we have the capacity also, sir?
Well, that's a very good question, because you can have all the rules in the world as long as, but if you don't have the capacity to implement them,
Absolutely.
then they're meaningless. They're just dead letter, essentially. So, and it's a technical area, even for prosecutors, for the courts also. So, once these rules are in the field, eventually, of course, jurisprudence will start getting developed around these rules. So there will be some more clarity around some of the terms and some of the phrases which have been used in the rules, right? But it's critical that in addition to enacting the right kind of rules, social media rules, we should also focus on capacity building, for instance, in the PTA and so on and so forth. FIA, the cybercrime.
I'll just give you one example of FIA, sir. I had an issue, somebody hacked my Facebook account, I had to go to the FIA office. I knew the guy there also, so got a call, and then he said, you can come over. So can you imagine, on the third floor, when maybe the third or the fourth, right, sir? There was no electricity, so you could not turn on your computers, I swear. Number one. Number two was that, and plus I had a Safarish, just imagine. I waited there till the light came back, and then we started working on it. And at the end of the day, nothing happened. We even traced from where it was at, like it was an office, so who could be held responsible? One. Secondly, sir, when you look at that kind of a capacity, it's better not to even have this setup. Because look at what United States is up to. This is the future warfare, sir. This is the future. Maybe another 10 to 15 years down the line, sir, I don't think we'll be having papers or anything of that sort in our hands. We were told by our parents to, improve your handwriting. Now kids, they just cut, copy, paste, put on a font, and everything is great. The assignment is prepared.
True.
Everything is changing. So when it comes to that kind of an issue, sir, when you talk about the capacity, even PTA, do they have a separate department? Are they geared up for the future or still stuck in the past somewhere, sir?
Well, I would hope that efforts would be afoot to ensure that they're keeping up with the changing times and that there would be capacity to deal with this demanding situation. So you can have a legal framework, but you also need proper implementation mechanism and capacity for that. So that can't be stressed enough.
Now coming to you, Mashriqi Saab, when you talk, you said that Pakistan is the fourth largest, user of internet. Look at the population, and I'm sure I'm not exactly 100% sure, but I think Americans, Indians, and Chinese would be ahead of us. Correct, sir? That makes the equation. It says Pakistan digital economy is estimated to increase in the tune of $5.5 billion. You talk about IT, sir. I remember there's no comparison with India. I remember during the last budget, the Prime Minister, in fact, said that we'll be increasing this to almost $5 billion US dollars, our exports in IT. Nothing has been done so far. Where do we lack, sir? Because at the end of the day, you need to have a lot of professional people looking after certain affairs. You should have a proper department in every institution to look after these affairs, and they should be in touch with PTA or FIA for that matter if there is something wrong. Are we moving in the right direction, sir? If not, what needs to be done now?
Faisal, I'll tell you one thing. Unfortunately, since 1999 to 2006, to be honest, our progress towards IT department was very rapid, was very good. And I must remember, I worked with some of the projects, and I was very happy that Pakistan is progressing a lot towards IT department. But after 2008 till I would say 2017-18, the will from the government to increase our infrastructure, our technical capacity was not that much concentrated, or that was not given time that much by the government. The government, for the two governments, I should say the political governments, they were not that much serious towards understanding the importance of infrastructure of IT, understanding the building up the human resource of IT. If I tell you the facts, that prior to 2007, Pakistan was one of the highest, I should say, IT enabling countries in the world.
So this
Pakistan
was the era of
progressing
Pervez
so well.
Musharraf, I remember. Our growth rate
Exactly,
was
that was
touching
the
around
era.
8.4, 8.5%.
Yes, our
Things were
growth
moving in the right direction. Every third party was
yes,
here
and-
to buy the license and
Yes.
establish their setup, whether it was
Exactly,
Telenor or
exactly.
Zong and so many other
Yes.
companies.
Yes. Now I'll give you one more thing. When we talk about the infrastructure and when we talk about these things, I'll give you an example of China. How did they manage? How did they control it? That they stopped Facebook all over China and they built a parallel app, parallel website, same as working with Facebook, and they stopped the Facebook in China. Then they stopped other apps in China, whatever was coming from America, because this is the way they have a better controlled. They have a better controlled media, and they give all the control to the people, whatever they want to do for their connectivity. But the main thing was there was a control on the narrative. Now Pakistan can use the same thing. Pakistan can tell these big social media giants that if you are gonna not understand that there is a sensitive matter, whether it's a blasphemy, whether it is the terrorism, whether it is the anti-state sectors working in Pakistan, if you're gonna promote them or if you're gonna allow them to do what they are doing, Pakistan will have no choice but to stop these social media apps. And Pakistan has a capacity, Faisal, I'm sure Pakistan has a capacity to build an equal platform, a parallel platform, even a better platform. I would give you an example that about 2 weeks ago, there was a rumor that WhatsApp is changing its privacy settings and everything. And there was 4 or 5 similar apps in the market, and they became popular overnight. So this is the time, this is the era when technology has been so advanced. There are so many options for the people to go, and there are so many options for the government of Pakistan as well. As far as the matter of security is concerned, yes, you're right that the internal capacity is a question, and then I will always say determination from the government is a question, and then the continuity of the rules and regulation and implementation of law is the question. The continuity is the biggest thing. When we talk about introducing a new law, whether it is a social media law or conventional laws, it is the continuity of the law and implementation of the law is the most important thing. And lastly, when we talk about Indian narrative, when we talk about American narrative, when we talk about anti-Pakistan narrative, then there is one narrative to show Pakistan's positivity. That is another thing which Pakistan government needs to work, which Pakistan's internal, media houses needs to work. That we have to portray and we have to send a positive narrative of Pakistan around the world. There are two ways. One way is to stop anti-Pakistan, anti-Islam, and terrorist narratives. But on the other hand, we have to implement and we have to show a positive image of Pakistan. And social media undoubtedly is the best tool. As long as the law is implemented, I think nobody would have object. Yes, there is only one question remains, that whatever the rules and laws are bringing in place, they should be only used for the security purpose, and there should not be any ambiguity, where there should not be any confusion in the laws, where they could question that these laws may be used for any any malintentions or any false intentions. That is the only question when we talk about political parties, because we will see a reaction from the parties where they will object some of the laws, that this is gonna be like maybe giving too much power to the institutions or governments. But we have a fair ground that we have to defend our institutions. If somebody is talking about our institutions, yes, they will bring to the justice, and this is happening everywhere in the world. You cannot talk about CIA against CIA in America. I mean, you cannot talk against MI6 in UK, and you cannot talk about any agencies in anywhere in the world. Then why people talk about so many things in Pakistan?
And
They
they
think
spread,
there are no red
interestingly, they
lines.
spread false stories, false news.
Exactly.
That's another
Now
aspect.
that's the point. Yes, they are always, when there is a propaganda, it's a false propaganda, and that is what I always say, that there has to be a red line defined for the users in Pakistan as well. That these are the red lines where they cannot cross. Whether it is judiciary, whether it is army, whether it is our ISI or other institutions, and then there are other factors where separatist movements or anything, where everything is based on false and fake information. We have seen a flood of false and fake information, and this is where these rules will help Pakistan to protect itself. This is a matter of
All right.
protection of the country.
All right. Now, sir, the interesting last question, because I was just told that we're running out of time, and I want your comment on that as well, sir. That there are so many tech companies in Pakistan, sir, and now they're not happy with these new rules being implemented, and they really want the Prime Minister to revisit these policies. What exactly do we need to do now, sir? The thin line you were talking about.
Yeah, I think they mentioned with the news item that has appeared in the newspaper, that they have consulted all stakeholders. ICPs, agencies, organizations, social media organizations. I think this document has been prepared after a lot of consultation with stakeholders. So when it is with the consultation of all the institutions and organizations, I think they must go ahead with what has been enacted, and that is the way it should be done.
Then how do you protect the rights of those organizations?
I think that's a kind of controversy they are trying to generate. I don't think so. I think Elisa will be putting us wise. Nobody's right will be impinged. I think people's right will be taken care of. They have to have some kind of balance between freedom of speech and spreading negativity and working against national interest. We have to draw a line somewhere.
All right, Ali Sultan sir.
Well, the Islamabad High Court, this matter is actually sub judice before the Islamabad High Court as we speak. And the Attorney General has promised the Islamabad High Court
But they'll be looking into the matter.
that they'll be looking into the matter. So let's just wait and see where the camel turns on this. Insofar,
But you're hopeful things would be better for us.
yes, we need to find that balance. I mean, I think even these digital rights companies would not disagree that some form of regulation is
Should be there.
essential. Now, what exactly that should be is something that, of course, they're going to have their own
Still to be seen.
perspective, and the government has its own perspective. So let's just hope that eventually everybody is going to be on board. And look, we have very active and independent courts in Pakistan. They've been very protective of fundamental rights and freedoms in our judicial history for the most part. So if some people find these rules to be slightly stringent, then of course the courts are always
There to assist.
yeah, the courts are always there to to fine tune these issues for us.
All right. Thank you so much, Ali Sultan, for your
It was a
presence.
pleasure.
Dr. Saab, it was a pleasure having you. Bashki Saab, thank you so much for your presence as well, sir. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you, inshallah, tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.